I'm a new ranger for the U.S. Forest Service and I'm nervous about some strange things that have been going on lately. Before I begin, there's something you have to understand about the woods, and I'm talking about the deep backcountry, 50 miles out from any station or sign of civilization. After a certain point, everything begins to blend. The longer you spend out there, the smaller and smaller you become, till you're just another part of the environment, a movement through the valleys and peaks. It's depersonalizing, ego-killing. You forgot things about yourself, and instincts guide you. It becomes natural. But it also makes you look like a lunatic. That's why we never spend more than 8 days alone in the backcountry at a time. That said, my first few months on the job were everything I wanted. Plenty of time outdoors, mostly upkeep on trails in the backcountry, along with checking up on some old stands the Forest Service had acquired in the 50s. The pine beetle epidemic was especially bad in my region this year, so I spent a lot of time marking the mortality rate in an area, amongst other details. For the most part, I loved my job. I'm a bit of an introvert, so time alone outdoors working is perfect for me. But there have been a few moments that still make me uncomfortable to think about. A couple weeks after I started, I woke up early and drove down a pretty rough, forested section of backcountry with lots of elevation. I was trying to check on a site that some backpackers, who had just returned from a week-long trek, had reported seeing bonfires in a few nights ago. They said the fires seemed a few hundred yards off the trail, and that there looked like people around the flames. An aerial team couldn't find any signs of fires like the backpackers were describing, so they assumed it was falsely reported. Even so, we had a serious burn ban in effect, and I was sent out to double-check and make sure. I got about 20 miles in before I found the section of the trail I needed to go down covered in earth, destroyed in some sort of landslide. It must have been recent, neither the backpackers or the aerial team noticed it, and someone would have. I definitely couldn't drive through, but I was only about 2 miles from the site, so I grabbed my pack, checked my water and radioed the forest station from my ATV to let them know I was hiking the rest of the way in. I probably should have waited for a crew to come out and clear the road, but we were all really concerned about a fire, and I won't lie, I was pissed at the thought of backpackers being so careless. You couldn't miss the signs coming into the forest warning about forest fires and announcing the burn ban. There was no reason to be reckless. And so, I hiked out there. It was only about 10:30 a.m. when I set out. I expected it to take about 2 hours to get to the area where the fires were reported. The elevation increase was drastic, so I had to pause every so often to catch my breath. After hiking for a while, I paused for a moment and realized I wasn't on the trail anymore. This isn't that unusual. If you've ever backpacked or even gone on long hikes before, you know that it's easier than you think to stumble off the trail, even for someone experienced. I'm one of the newest and youngest rangers, but I've spent a lot of time outdoors backpacking and hiking and normally have a great sense of direction, so I wasn't too alarmed not to know exactly where I was. You get used to being lost. The thing that alarmed me was noticing a pink hue lighting up the forest. The sun was about to disappear behind the tree line that covered the mountain to the west. I didn't think I'd been hiking that long. I had gone maybe a mile and a half in an hour, or so I thought. Nonetheless, it appeared to be almost 7 p.m. now. I quickly decided the safest thing would be to head back south towards my ATV, which stored all my overnight gear, and come back tomorrow. It would be embarrassing to explain to the other rangers that I lost track of time, but it would be worse to get stuck out here all night. Without the right equipment, I might freeze to death. Besides, they'd start wondering why I hadn't checked back in after so long. I grabbed some loose stones off the ground and left a sign to indicate I had been there and set off in the direction I thought I wandered off the trail from. I quickly found it, but it was a section I hadn't been through earlier. Somehow, I had found my way farther north. And funnily enough, I saw a yellow trail marker not far up the mountain. I realized it was the marker for the next 10-mile section, the area the fire reports had mentioned. The sun was almost touching the mountains now, but I decided to hike up to the marker at least, stay for a few minutes and then quickly head back before it got completely dark. I realized this wasn't ideal, but at the time it seemed better than going back with nothing to report. I hiked the few dozen yards to the marker and looked out over the valley to the east. It seemed empty, nothing unusual. I took a sip from my water bottle and waited another 5 minutes. I still didn't see anything, so I decided to head out. I hadn't gone a mile before I smelled smoke coming down the mountain. I looked around but couldn't see any smoke columns. It was kind of unsettling. The sunset was so red everywhere I looked seemed to glow surreally. Getting worried, I stumbled the last mile back and immediately called it in. The night was darker now, and without any trace of fire in the valley. Despite smelling the smoke earlier, I decided to spend the night on the trail, in case whatever caused it caught up again. I set up a temporary camp with my one-man tent and waited the night out. Nights in the backcountry are different than camping in other places. In the back of your head, you recognize that you are completely alone for dozens of miles. You end up listening to the night differently. Everything you hear suddenly becomes important, because now you're just another part of the forest, vulnerable. At some point I woke up from a dream I can't remember now, but I recall feeling unsettled. I poked my head out of tent and crawled out to take a leak and look around for a minute. I didn't see anything, but it's hard to explain exactly how I felt. It was almost like I was being observed, but very lightly, as a part of the background. It was kind of disconcerting, so I went back to sleep pretty quickly. Aerial recon flew over the next morning, and still found nothing. About midday, the team arrived to clear the landslide and the other rangers and I began searching the backcountry. At the end of the second day we found it. A chunk of the forest had completely burned down. It was tucked into a valley to the northeast, only a few hundred yards away from where I camped the first night, but I missed it then. It was maybe 200 yards across and 300 running down the mountainside. You'd think this would be too large to escape notice, but it took us almost 2 days to find it. Even then, the aerial team missed it altogether. This was a strange fire, too. It burned in an almost clean line down the mountain's ridge, forming a recognizable rhombus. And normally forest fires around here aren't intense enough to completely kill off the fully grown pine trees, but this fire had been hot. Everything was scorched, total mortality. It almost seemed unnatural, but we couldn't find anything in the ashes to explain it. I wondered if I had missed something for a few days after we left, but eventually after talking with the veteran rangers I decided it was just one of those things that can't be explained. Apparently, it's not all that uncommon from what they've said. According to them, if you spend enough time in the wilderness, you start to see things seeing you. I didn't know what they meant by that, but we didn't have time to talk more and I haven't seen them much since. A week after that, I found a couple idiots trying to start a cooking fire at one of the trailheads. I yelled at them probably harsher than I should have, they seemed to genuinely feel bad about it. Apparently, they'd missed all the signs. I decided to let it go and began to leave, but before I drove out, I saw the spark and catch of a fire in the review mirror. Infuriated, I drove back and got out, but the campers were just as confused as me. The fire pit was completely cold, it looked the same as I had just seen it, empty and unused after making them clean out the twigs and leaves they tried to use. Confused, I walked around the entire trailhead but didn't see any sign of a fire. I figured it was a trick of light in the review mirror and left. I convinced myself over the next couple months not to worry about the weird fire stuff, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened until a few days ago. I was on trail maintenance with another ranger, Lauren. She'd been working as a ranger for almost 10 years, so I generally followed her lead. We were about 15 miles into the backcountry checking on some primitive campsites for backpackers. We were currently at campsite 3. There's 8 total, and they form a large U over almost 90 miles surrounding one of the larger mountains in the region. It was getting into fall, so it was supposed to be empty while we worked our way through, checking up on site quality. All afternoon I had been cutting out a new trail from the campsite up to a spring that had changed course recently. The shadows were beginning to grow long, but I was close to finishing, so I kept cutting away. About half an hour later I broke through and walked onto a boulder the ground slanted into and watched the head of the spring just inside up the mountain. It looked like a deer path meandered its way up the spring head, so I started up. When I got there, I almost threw up. The spring flowed clearly enough, but just to the right of it a section of the ground turned to weathered stone. In the middle a skinned deer laid in a pool of blood, with splatters and other pools of blood scattered everywhere in the nearby vicinity. I've seen plenty of dead animals before, But this was fucked up. Something had skinned a deer, and very cleanly, and I couldn't find any other signs of damage. It had bled to death, and God, there was blood everywhere, but its actual hide was nowhere to be seen. Flies were starting to circle the meat. It didn't look like it had been dead long. I quickly hiked back down the several hundred yards I cut out and found Lauren, who was back from working and making dinner. I paused to catch my breath and told her I had to show her something. She looked concerned, so we went back up to the spring. When we got there, the deer was gone, and I couldn't find a drop of blood. I had been gone maybe an hour at the most. It didn't seem possible. Lauren assumed I was just fucking with her, so I played it off and tried to forget about it. But I haven't forgotten about it. And apparently, Lauren told my supervisor, Jonathan. He asked me to come back to the forest station, so tomorrow I'm driving out of the backcountry. He sounded different though, almost like he didn't really want to call me in. I guess I'll see how it goes and update this when I can. They know what's up. This isn't normal. You should try not to get killed. If you mention staircases to know where I'm done. You should try not to get killed. Solid advice, mate. Oof, I loved that series so much. I got unreasonably excited for 3 a.m. when I saw the title, but have you seen Stairs in the Woods though?